and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
I go on and on, can't understand how I last so long. I must have superpowers, rap 225,000 hours. Get a calculator, do the math. I made 1,000 songs that made you move, yeah. And for the last 300 months, I made 16 albums with me on the front, and they bump. Where you get your beats? I heard 93 rappers say like me. 2 singers and 10 comedians, and I'm still gonna yell it every time you see me in. What's my favorite word? Why they gotta say it like short? You know they can't play on my court, can't hang with the big dogs, stay on the porch. Blow the whistle. Blow the whistle.
Blow the whistle.
Blow the whistle.
I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm glad to have you on in this hour. Let me explain to you who our guest is in this hour, and you'll understand why my Miles is playing Blow the Whistle. My board op, as you know, is named Miles Lowe, but I'm talking to a different Miles in this hour. Let me tell you about Miles that I'm talking to in this hour. In 2018, former Department of Homeland Security Chief of Staff Miles Taylor wrote an anonymous piece in the New York Times from inside the Trump administration. He revealed in that piece publicly what Trump's cabinet was saying privately, that the president was dangerously unfit for public office. Since then, he has unmasked himself. That's why we know his name is Miles Taylor. And he's urging voters not to reelect the most dangerous man in America in 2020. And launched the largest alliance of ex-officials in U.S. history to take down the president who appointed them. His new book out now is called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. In the text, Miles Taylor provides never-before-told anecdotes and first-person interviews with Trump's closest aides to illustrate how a deeply divided nation is setting the stage for the resurgence of Trumpism. We'll unpack that throughout this hour, how we're setting the stage for the resurgence of Trumpism after I welcome Miles Taylor to this program. Miles Taylor, how are you today, sir?
Tavis, it's great to be with you. And honestly, the lead-in song, I was sitting here in my chair and I was just kind of like rocking side to side. So thank you. That was a really fun lead-in. So
Yeah.
I think we should hear that song on the back end too.
Okay. Miles Lowe, you heard it from Miles Taylor. He wants to hear it on the back end, so we'll do it on the back end as well. So Miles Taylor shouting out Miles Lowe for picking that track. So it's an all Miles thing in this hour. And
Amen.
Yeah, and I ain't mad about it. Before I get to, again, how we are setting the stage for the resurgence of Trumpism, before I get into the book, Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump, let me go back to 2018 when you were at DHS at the time and wrote this piece in the New York Times anonymously. I recall that like it was yesterday. When this piece hit the New York Times, written by somebody inside the Trump administration, all hell broke loose. Everybody in the country was talking about this piece. Everybody trying to figure out who had written the piece. It was the topic du jour, as you well know, for a couple of days. Before I get into the piece itself, which I remember so well, how did it feel watching this brouhaha that you had stirred up in the media?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say this first, Tavis. Anyone would be right to question my judgment for trying to sound the alarm anonymously. I mean, it's a very, very fair moral question about whether I should have just, resigned and come out in my own name, or stayed in the administration and tried to keep the wheels on the wagon and write this anonymous opinion piece. And I'll take you very briefly into my mindset. And I'll caveat, I'm not trying to compare myself to the Founding Fathers, but I'm a student of history, and the Founding Fathers had written these essays called the Federalist Papers to try to sell the U.S. Constitution to the country. And they did it anonymously for a reason at the time, because they knew if they didn't put their names on it, it would draw more attention to the message and not on the messenger. And I actually thought, I remember when I first read about that in 7th grade, and I thought, well, that's incredibly clever that they took that approach. And you know what it led to? It led to a big national conversation about the issues related to the Constitution instead of about the people who were writing these essays. And so I tried to do that with this. And, on the upside, I do think it led to an urgent national conversation about the president's mental fitness and his stability, because that's what I was hearing from, every day inside the administration. The cabinet members, especially on the national security side of the administration, were so alarmed about Donald Trump that they started to talk about the 25th Amendment and the possibility that he might need to be removed from office. So I felt like the country needed to hear that. Now, on the downside, even though it led to a pressing national conversation, it also led to this game of guess who, that when I was watching that transpire, I worried would become too much of a distraction. And ultimately, it was one of the reasons I unmasked myself, is because I needed to go out there and talk in specific detail about the corruption that I had witnessed. But that was a hard thing to do in this environment, to unmask yourself knowing that you'll be hit with an avalanche of social media vitriol.
And what did, in fact, happen, Miles Taylor, when you unmasked yourself?
Yeah, well, look, it's I'm a cautionary tale for how coarse our political environment has gotten, and coming forward and turning against the Republican tribe, going out against Trump. It had a lot of repercussions, and I always caveat this by saying no one has to have sympathy for me. I'm not looking for sympathy. I went into this eyes wide open. I knew it would be bad, but it did cost a lot. It cost me my home at the time. I had to leave my home because of threats. It cost me a very serious relationship I was in at the time, a lot of friendships. It cost my family their safety. I ended up having to drain my savings to pay for lawyers to protect us. And I ended up on election night 2020 in a safe house in Northern Virginia under armed guard and with a pistol under my pillow because, especially from the far right, the threats. And again, I say no sympathy is needed for me, but the sympathy is needed for the people who didn't expect that to happen to them. The poll workers, the state and local election officials, people who spoke up and just tried to do the right thing in 2020 and who've been stalked, harassed, and villainized ever since. And I worry about the corrosion in our democratic discourse, and that it's going to make other people afraid to call out corruption when they see it.
To your latter point, when we come forward, I guess, Miles Taylor, I want to ask him straight away, was it worth it? He writes this piece in the New York Times. Everybody's talking about it, and yet, as you heard from his own mouth, he ends up with death threats and having to sleep with a gun under his pillow. Was it worth it? We'll get his answer to that and get straight away into his new book, Blowback, a warning to save democracy from the next Trump. You're listening to Miles Taylor right now on Tavis Smiley.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Good thing we've got 3 hours.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dominique DePrima, and there are so many reasons to take out a small business loan. Set yourself up for long-term success with access to credit for operating expenses, equipment, and technology, leasing or financing, and more. Although the process may seem daunting, your U.S. Bank Business Access Advisor can guide you through that process. Whatever your financial goals, U.S. Bank Access Commitment can help support you in reaching them. Access your financial goals at usbank.com/access. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Extreme heat increases your risk of heat illness and death. Warning signs of heat exhaustion include muscle cramps, headache, and nausea. Signs of heat stroke include a fever of 103 or higher, confusion, and loss of consciousness. Protect yourself by limiting time spent outdoors, staying hydrated. and staying cool in air-conditioned spaces. Learn how to stay safer from extreme heat at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
On your period, sudden gushes happen without warning. But now, you can say goodbye to stand-up gush fears, thanks to Always Ultra Thins with rapid dry technology. It absorbs gushes 2 times faster than the leading store brand and gives you up to 100% leak-free protection. Hello, clean and comfortable with Always Fear No Gush.
Shop end-of-season deals during the Truckload event at Lowe's. Right now, save on major appliances and get an additional 10% off in-store clearance appliances. Plus, take up to 50% off select patio furniture and accessories, and save on select grills and outdoor power equipment. Great deals are happening now, in-store and online. Lowe's knows savings. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid through 7/26. Exclusions apply. While supplies last. Selection varies by location. See Lowe's.com for details.
To my hometown, my community. Some of you have known me my whole life. Do you notice anything different about the kids in the neighborhood? Ever paid attention? We might start with gifts, money, attention. These are signs. Child trafficking is happening right here in this town. So don't just watch through the window. Pay attention. Because the more we know, the more we'll all know to say no. Learn the signs to look for and how to help at no-to-say-no.com.
Broadcasting live from Leimert Park, USA. Welcome back to your home for unapologetically progressive radio, KBLA Talk 1580.
Our guest is Miles Taylor. Some years ago, he wrote an anonymous piece for the New York Times saying publicly what Trump's cabinet members were saying privately, that he was mentally and dangerously unfit for office. That piece got all kinds of attention. And because he was concerned about the Guess Who game that my profession was playing about who wrote the piece, he eventually came out unmasked himself, that is, and then, as you heard him say moments ago, all kind of drama ensued, including death threats and concern for his life and that of his family. I asked before I move forward, Miles Taylor, was it worth it in retrospect?
Yes. Yeah, I would do it again. Now, I would do it a little differently because my one regret, Tavis, is I wish I had come forward even sooner, because I realized when I unmasked myself that the reason other people weren't coming forward, people who, Republicans who in private said all the time they worried Trump was a threat to the country, the reason they weren't coming forward is no one else had been doing it. People weren't making it easier. I mean, just like anything, there's strength in numbers. And when I unmasked myself, to my surprise and delight, a lot of my former colleagues then came forward. I mean, in the weeks before the 2020 election, Jake Tapper said we were the largest group of ex-administration officials in American history to turn against the president that appointed them. But I wish that process had started sooner, and I waited more than a year to take the mask off. And the honest answer, Tavis, of why I waited so long is I was scared. And people like to think, whistleblowers are fearless, or, these are people who, thank you for your courage, all those sorts of things. That's not how I felt at the time. I felt like a scared kid because I knew that my life was going to be upended, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that. And I wrestled with that decision, but ultimately I felt like I would spend the rest of my life looking in the mirror and feeling like I was a coward if in such an instance of black and white morality, a very bad man trying to destroy the country, if I couldn't stand up against that, then I didn't want to live. And so, no, I don't regret coming forward at all. In fact, I would do it again and again, but I do wish I'd done it a lot sooner.
Let me pivot just for a second here, and then we'll get our way, make our way straightway, Miles Taylor, into your new book, Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. And I want to start by asking why even write this book. Before I do that, though, let me pivot to something, and I'm not trying to be scary or scare you, but we now know who you are. You unmask yourself. And I'm thinking about Salman Rushdie. I know Salman Rushdie. I've interviewed him a number of times over the course of my career and his career. and of course you know where I'm going already with this conversation just by mentioning his name.
Mm-hmm.
They told Salman Rushdie years ago, "We're going to get you." That book, The Satanic Verses, put a target on Salman Rushdie's back, and they said to him publicly, "We are going to get you." Years went by before they finally got Salman Rushdie. As you know, they did not kill him, but they got a hold of him, and it cost him an eye. He was in the hospital for days, badly beaten, and can now only see out of one eye. So years went by, but they kept their word, and they finally got their hands on Salman Rushdie. You see where I'm going with this. Again, not trying to be scary here, but you said you would do it again and again and again, and I'm thinking Salman Rushdie, you take my point. What are you thinking now?
Well, you have to, when you enter this political fray today, especially going against the MAGA movement, which has really become quite a violent movement. Now, there's plenty of good Americans who consider themselves MAGA, but I think who've been duped by that tribe and who aren't violent people. But there are violent extremists in that movement. We have to think about it a lot. We take those precautions. Like I said, I gave up almost everything in this fight except my life, but I'd be willing to give that to make sure that we don't see someone throw our democracy away, like we might see with a Trump 2.0 if he or a MAGA copycat returns to the White House. But at the same time, Tavis, I will say this. I come from the world of national security and law enforcement, so we take a lot of special precautions, and I would pity the poor soul who would think to attack me or my family member, because it's not going to end super well for them.
Yep, I take your point, and I'll leave it right there. And trust me, I wouldn't be so dumb as to be the one to try to harm you or your family, given your national security background. Once again, I'll leave that, as my grandmother said, we're going to leave that lay where the good Lord done flung it. We're going to leave it right over there where the good Lord done flung it. That said, Miles Taylor, before I get, again, straight away into the text, I am curious, because I think this question is overarching, but I think it sets the stage for where I want to go with you for the rest of this hour. This book is written in part because you think that we are living in a moment where we are once again not just a deeply divided nation, but a nation that is setting the stage for the resurgence of Trumpism. Unpack that phrase for me as you see it, please.
Yeah, and I like to do it with the data, because I would make the case that in 2016, when Donald Trump was running, if you looked at the polls, a majority of Republicans did not consider themselves Trump supporters. They did not align themselves with the MAGA movement. He actually ended up winning state by state by state because it was such a crowded field. And he had, 20% here or 30% here, which ended up being the plurality of the vote. But there's something very different happening right now, which is in the early numbers we're seeing in the primary states, Donald Trump has over 50%. He's got a much bigger base of support. And that data shows me that Trumpism and the MAGA movement have now really overtaken the core of the Republican Party. And it's from the federal level all the way down to the state and local GOP chapters. They've really taken over the machinery. And so the conditions are right for either Trump to return or for the next Trump to emerge, because anyone who would lead the Republican Party right now has to cater to that base. And when you look in surveys and you ask Republicans about their views, they've increasingly started to align themselves with really fringe positions Donald Trump took. And I'll name three, which is we saw during Trump's presidency the emergence of a lot of conspiracy theories. He's probably one of the most conspiratorial people to have ever held the office. No, I'll correct that. The most conspiratorial person to have ever been president of the United States. But most of us, like you and I, Tavis, looked at those crazy Trump tweets and we said, those are the rantings of a lunatic. And clearly people will see through it. Well, the conspiracy theories he promoted, like QAnon, or the disgusting Great Replacement theory that alleges that third world, people and people of color are infiltrating the United States to suppress whites, or, of course, the big lie that, Joe Biden stole the election from Donald Trump. All of those are provably false conspiracy theories. But each of those that I just mentioned to you is now believed by more than 50% of Republican voters. There's no other way to describe that than radicalization. And even if someone doesn't claim to be MAGA, if they take over that party, they're going to have to cater to those voters to stay in office. And that's why I think there's a grave risk of whoever the GOP nominee is being someone who tries to advance that MAGA movement, which I think at its core is anti-democratic.
To what extent, then, I take your point, I hear you loud and clear. To what extent, then, do you think the culture wars are going to play into this impending reality as you see it?
Oh, gosh, I wish I had a happier answer on this, but I spoke to a lot of people for this book, Blowback, and that's one of the questions that I asked. In fact, my goal was not to write this all in my voice. I wanted people to hear from as many Trump officials as possible, to know straight from the horse's mouth what they're going to plan on doing if they retake the White House. And that includes people who are still close to the former president and top Republicans in Congress. And I asked about what their domestic policy agenda will be in a second term. And Tavis, here was the quote a Trump confidant gave me. He said, the priority will be guns, gays, and girls. All right, all culture war issues. And I said, break that down for me. He said, guns, because we're going to work to strip any protections on the gun control front so that it's an unfettered Second Amendment. Gays, because we're going to try to roll back the Supreme Court's decision on gay marriage. And I said, well, what do you mean about girls? He said, well, abortion. The Supreme Court's already given us the air cover to make abortion illegal across the United States, and they've already succeeded in getting about a dozen states in this country to make abortion effectively illegal. I got to tell you, when I first entered the Republican Party, I thought the culture wars were dead, and I thought we were moving beyond it, and the GOP was going to try to be a bigger tent party, and we could debate about taxes, and we could debate about welfare reform, but I thought the culture wars would fade away. Instead, that is going to be the GOP's policy agenda when the next Trump takes office. But it's not just the culture wars being fought with rhetoric. I mean, we're talking about them wanting to fight the culture wars with loaded guns because it's gotten so violent in their approach to those issues.
That's a dangerous agenda. I hear it loud and clear. Those 3 Gs, guns, gays, and girls, as told to Miles Taylor by one who knows what Donald Trump's agenda would be if he is granted by the American people a second term: guns, gays, and girls. Let me ask this. And I've often wondered about this, and I now get a chance to ask you, and I know you'll be forthright and direct with me. Donald Trump certainly got worse the longer he stayed inside the White House. But I recall getting in a lot of trouble, a lot of heat myself for something I said. I called Donald Trump irascible, and a great deal more than that one Sunday on, what was I on? This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Long before he got elected, I made a comment, and I just caught all kind of hell. People were, all over me for making this comment, and we hadn't seen the worst of Donald Trump at that point. But I could read the tea leaves, and I knew what was coming. I wasn't the only one. I'm not trying to make myself a savant or anything. The point was, I made this comment, and I got a lot of pushback for making that comment. I could see that before Donald Trump even got elected. This is not going to end well for the American people. And yet a whole lot of people wanted to be a part of the Trump administration. As I mentioned, you wrote that op-ed in the New York Times. I'm glad you did, in 2018. But you were chief of staff in the Department of Homeland Security. What have you discovered, or what can you tell me from your own perspective about why so many of y'all wanted to be in that administration in the first place? And if his inauguration address didn't scare you, good Lord! I mean, you'd have to go to work. You'd have to go to work on day 2. I mean, the inauguration speech itself was he was flame throwing on day.
It was like a horror movie.
Yeah, he was flame throwing on day 1. So why did so many people in your research want to be a part of that administration to begin with? And I'm only asking it because I've seen a lot of people, yourself included, who have now come out against Donald Trump and said he should not be elected. I mean, I'm even thinking of the Attorney General, Mr. Barr. I mean, these people now have no compunction whatsoever about saying what they really feel about Donald Trump. But at the time, everybody wanted to be in his administration. My question is why, Miles Taylor?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, Tavis. And I've often described it as a moral choose-your-own-adventure, or better yet, a moral choose-your-own-nightmare, because there were a lot of really, really bad options and a lot of really worse options for Republicans when trying to figure out what to do when Donald Trump got elected. Now, to be clear, there were people who were mega MAGA who went into that administration that were true believers. I know that to be the case because I served with them and saw up close what they were like. In my case, I was never a MAGA person. I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016, hoped to hell that Hillary Clinton would defeat him, even though I was a Republican and had worked to try to get as many Republicans as possible to rescind their endorsements of Donald Trump. I've got the receipts. I mean, in that last week before the election, I was desperately trying to get Republican congressmen to rescind their endorsements because I said, even if the guy has a small chance, we cannot leave our democracy to a coin flip. And a lot of them wouldn't do it. Why? Well, a lot of them wanted to go into positions of power, but there was a better cohort. There was a cohort of people who went into the Trump administration that I actually think could have been cabinet secretaries in the Clinton administration. Jim Mattis, for instance, who was defense secretary, was so well regarded across the political spectrum. I actually think there's a chance someone like that could have ended up being Hillary Clinton's Secretary of Defense. And so folks like Jim Mattis, who did not know Donald Trump, agreed to go into the administration because, based on what they'd seen, the guy looked pretty scary. And at a minimum, even if you had a favorable view of him and you were a Republican, you had to know in your heart of hearts, that guy didn't look like he was very qualified to go in and actually take that job. And so I declined a number of jobs to go into that administration at the beginning and wanted to stay on Capitol Hill because it just looked scary as hell to me. I didn't want to be involved in that, and it was clear it would be career suicide.
Let me cut in for a quick second. And yet, at some point, you convinced yourself to go in the administration, and I want to hear why when we come forward. His name is Miles Taylor. His new book is called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. If you're in the Southern California area, I'll tell you when we come forward where you can see him. He's in town tomorrow night. Miles Taylor right now on Tavis Smiley.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The Justice Department is giving Texas an ultimatum. Remove a floating barrier from the Rio Grande or get sued. At issue is a floating border barrier made of large buoys anchored to the river bottom at an area called Eagle Pass. In a letter to Republican Governor Greg Abbott, the feds called the barrier illegal and said it poses serious risk to public safety and the environment. Abbott maintains that Texas has the right to defend its border. All football activities are being suspended at HBCU Florida A&M University. Friday, football coach, African-American Willie Simmons, announced via Twitter that all football-related activities are banned after an unauthorized music video was shot inside the school's locker room. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
We have a SIG alert in the Port of Long Beach on the 710 northbound at Ocean Boulevard. That on-ramp blocked with an overturned big rig. Heavy traffic in the area. 10 westbound at Crenshaw, clearing a wreck off to the right shoulder. Pretty slow there from Arlington out to Robertson. 405 North Drive, reduced speeds between the 110 and the 105, then gets extra busy up toward the Santa Monica Freeway.
Looking for a late night spot to get the crew together? 3 words, Buffalo Wild Wings. They've got drinks and apps starting at $4 from 10 p.m. till close. B-dubs, where late night food and drinks start at $4. Cheers to that. Limited time at participating locations. Offers, days, and times may vary. Drink responsibly. Void or prohibited. Tax and fees extra.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The NBA no longer has a black majority owner. The league's board of governors formally approved the sale of the Charlotte Hornets, ending a 13-year run for Michael Jordan. Jordan was the NBA's only black majority owner. The Hornets now belong to a couple of rich guys named Rick Schnall and Gabe Plotkin. Jordan paid $275 million for the Hornets in 2010. He and his investment team are taking home $3 billion. The Hornets made the playoffs only 3 times under Jordan's watch and were bounced in the first round each time. They won only 41% of their games, the 4th worst record in the league in that 13-year stretch. Florida A&M football coach Willie Simmons suspended all football activities at the HBCU school until further notice. An unauthorized rap video was made in the team's locker room. The administration is investigating. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm James Alexander, a proud member of AARP. 1967, I was 17. That spring, my friends, the Barcades, and I made Soulfinger. It was a hit. Number 3 on the charts. That summer, we became the great Otis Redding's band. First gig, the famed Apollo. That fall, we toured. That winter found me in a morgue identifying the bodies of my bandmates and Otis Redding. My music and their memories bring me joy. The Barcades forever.
What would you call a joy that is as solemn as it is sweet and knows no bounds? A joy that's beautifully rooted in soul and resilience. This is Black Joy, a joy that reflects pride and honor despite every challenge. AARP believes the power of Black joy is limitless, and we celebrate this joy supreme. Join us in celebrating Black joy at aarp.org/blackcommunity.
KBLA Talk 1580 stands for Unity and Healing. African Focus Incorporated is a nonprofit organization based in California that focuses on the growth and well-being of Africans all around the world. Their mission is to promote the well-being of people of African descent through knowledge and appreciation of one another by building a bridge of love and understanding. African Focus Incorporated strives for cultural, educational, and economic growth. They're the organization behind the African Family Induction Ceremony, African Goodwill Awards, African Focus Trailblazer Tours, African Dance Competition, and Showcase Los Angeles, Family Day, Good News Windows Microfinance Project, and more. To volunteer, travel with African Focus, or to attend one of their community building events, please call 310-676-7730. That's 310-676-7300. Or visit AfricanFocus.org. This is a diaspora-wide community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like watering your lawn during the hottest time of the day and leaky faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate meets a scholarly match.
If you are in the Southern California area tomorrow, Tuesday, July 25th at 6:30 p.m., you can see him in person at the Diesel Bookstore in Santa Monica doing a talk and signing tomorrow night. Here in Southern California in Santa Monica, should be that's a nice time to head out to the beach. 6:30 tomorrow night in Santa Monica at Diesel Books. Miles Taylor will be in town lecturing and signing books. His book is called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. In case you've just tuned in, he's the guy, the whistleblower, the anonymous person who wrote that op-ed in the New York Times back in 2018 that we were all talking about. We knew that somebody inside the Trump administration had written this article saying publicly what the cabinet members were saying privately, that Donald Trump was dangerously unfit mentally and beyond to be president of these United States. I recall, again, like it was yesterday, that article coming out and all the conversation that ensued, trying to figure out who had written this piece. Well, he eventually unmasked himself. His name is Miles Taylor, and since writing that op-ed piece, he's now authored this new book. Once again, it's called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. He's appearing here in L.A. Tomorrow night, 6:30 at Diesel Bookstore in Santa Monica. But I am honored, and I hope you are just as delighted to hear him right now in conversation here on Tavis Smiley. So you were telling me, you were answering my question before that break, Miles, and you were telling me that there were any number of entreaties that came your way to join the administration when Trump took the office of president. And at first you sort of passed on it a few times, and ultimately you decided to take a position. You ended up as chief of staff in the Department of Homeland Security. But why did you go inside?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, at the time, let's pretend anyone else besides Donald Trump had been president. Man, that would have been my dream, to go work in the White House and work on national security issues. I mean, that was my lifelong dream after 9/11, is go in, help protect the country against foreign terrorist threats and foreign nation states. But when there were job offers in the Trump White House, I thought, I don't want to be anywhere near that guy because of what we'd seen in the primaries. But then I had a mentor, someone who I looked up to a lot at the time, John Kelly, who was at the time a 4-star Marine general at U.S. Southern Command, and he gets picked to be Secretary of Homeland Security. And basically the comment from John Kelly was, Miles, it's not as bad as it looks inside the Trump administration. It is so much worse. And the people who'd gone in the first wave, I mean, he was as serious as a heart attack about that. And the people who'd gone in the first wave, like him, said, oh my God, he's so much more undisciplined than anyone realizes. And Kelly was trying to bring together a team that was willing to go in, that would try to keep DHS as stable as possible, because the department was in Trump's crosshairs. He was obsessed with immigration, but DHS does a lot more than immigration. It protects Americans against cyber attacks and terrorist attacks and foreign spies and wildfires and tornadoes. But all Trump thought about was immigration. And Kelly, he was not an immigration guy. And so he wanted other national security professionals in there. And so I agreed several months in to come in and work as his national security advisor. As you know, later on, a couple of years later, I became chief of staff there. But earlier, Tavis, I mentioned regrets. And one of my big regrets, and anyone who comes and joins us tomorrow at Diesel Bookstore can hear me, self-flagellate about the things that I wish we had done better, was believing that this cohort could keep Donald Trump in check. I fell victim to this notion that there was a so-called axis of adults around Donald Trump, and that we had the ability to contain his worst impulses. In fact, I'll go a step further, Tavis, is I'm guilty of being one of the biggest boosters of that idea. Is, at the time, whether it was stories that I passed along to the press or in my op-ed, I said, Trump is scary, but don't worry, there's this axis of adults. And I could not have been more wrong. In fact, I would say I was catastrophically wrong in spreading the idea that these people and people like us could keep him in check, because Donald Trump just ended up resisting at the end of the day and replacing those people with lieutenants who were willing to say yes to behavior that was illegal or unethical, or in some cases things he wanted to do that were unconstitutional. So I look back now, and again, that's one of my biggest regrets. And I'll point, specific things like policies that never, ever should have seen the light of day, like family separation, all of a sudden come to life in a horror story because Donald Trump refuses to be told no. And that was the point that I had to really reckon with, whether staying inside and trying to keep things in check was working anymore. I mean, the old adage is, when saying no is no longer enough, then you got to reconsider your choices. And that's when I decided to resign. And I thought the only way to do this now is from the outside and not the inside, because it's just not working in here.
Yeah. You referenced earlier in this conversation, Miles, a viewpoint that some of you held then, that Trump was not representative of the entire GOP. Let me come to that now, because it still may be the case that he doesn't represent the entire GOP. But when you look at the way that members of Congress, you once worked on Capitol Hill, you look at the way now these Republicans are attacking the FBI. Look at what they did to the director just days ago when he testified. And this director, of course, was appointed by Donald Trump. He's still there. But when you look at the ways that they are now carrying his baggage, as it were, and suggesting that the raid at Mar-a-Lago was they were out to get him, and the ways again they're attacking the FBI and other institutions of law enforcement. I mean, these are Republicans. They would never have done that, 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago. That's their agenda. Law enforcement is part of the Republican agenda. So again, it may have been the case some years ago that Trump was not representative of the entire GOP, but how do you read that now given the behavior of these Republicans in Congress?
Tavis, I mean, you called out one of the best examples of it is the Republican Party that I joined used to talk about back the blue and stand behind law enforcement. And now their mantra is basically blow up the blue. Let's detonate the nation's premier investigative law enforcement agency, the FBI. That's not standing with law enforcement. That's trying to turn them into a political weapon, which is really, really scary stuff. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I quit the Republican Party, which I'm not going to lie, when you build your whole career around being in public policy and you leave your tribe, your career's over. I can't work in national security policy again because, the Democrats aren't going to take me. I'm not a Democrat, and I'm not going back to that tribe while it's corrupted by the MAGA movement. But one of those reasons is because of this very bizarre turn towards law enforcement, and it underscores what you pointed out, Tavis, which is that Donald Trump was not an aberration. And it's yet another thing that I was very, very wrong about, and many of us were wrong about, is deluding ourselves into thinking if we could just wait him out for 4 years, we would be okay. Mm-hmm. But in the course of that 4 years, he managed to contort the entire party into his image. And now those fringe ideas like gutting the FBI, which Republicans used to eye roll at. I mean, I can remember sitting with senators and congressmen during the administration. They would say, yeah. He talks about a witch hunt. He talks about blowing up the FBI, but that stuff will all be gone when he's gone. Mm-hmm. Well, the opposite has happened. Mm-hmm. That's now one of the main talking points of the Republican House of Representatives is cleansing the FBI. Cleansing is a very scary word. That gives us, the hair jumps up on my arms when I say it because it makes you think of Nazi Germany. But that's the way the Republican Party is talking today. So I do think the party's been corrupted by him, which means it's going to be a generational challenge to get the GOP back to a sane party, if ever.
Miles Taylor's in Southern California tomorrow night. If you're in Southern California, Tuesday, July 25th, 6:30 p.m. at Diesel Bookstore in Santa Monica, talking about and signing copies of his new book. It's called Blowback, a warning to save democracy from the next Trump, which leads me to ask when we come forward, what if the next Trump is the same old Trump, number one? And number two, if the next Trump is not the Donald Trump that we know, what say we about that? Because that's what Miles Taylor is concerned about, not just Donald Trump making a comeback, but the fact that we are setting the stage for the resurgence of Trumpism, no matter who the GOP puts forward. We'll talk more about it when we come forward with Miles Taylor on Tavis Smiley.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the Voice of Reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
The Los Angeles Urban League helps African American and others in underserved communities achieve true social parity, economic self-reliance, and civil rights. For over 100 years, Los Angeles Urban League has ensured our communities have access to careers with living wages, opportunities to start and grow businesses, and clear pathways to personal and professional growth. Programs like BizCamp, Construction Career Academy, Bob Business Ready, and B-Warp The Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program are examples of the ongoing events designed to make our centennial mission to rebuild Black Wall Street right here in LA a reality. To sign up for our newsletter or to support the Los Angeles Urban League with your time, talents, and donations, visit laul.org. That's laul.org. The Los Angeles Urban League is a proud sponsor of Urban Family Focus Saturdays at 7 a.m. on KBLA Talk 1580.
In our community, mental health struggles can sometimes go unnoticed. The suicide rate among Black youth has risen faster than any other ethnic group. Only 1 in 3 African Americans who need mental health care receives it. African American women are only half as likely as their Caucasian counterparts to seek professional mental health services. Even those who guide us spiritually can sometimes face their own challenges. 45% of pastors say they've experienced depression or burnout to the extent they need to take a leave of absence from ministry. As people of faith, it's time to acknowledge it's okay not to be okay. You can pray and get help. Visit normalizehelp.org for more information and resources. Join us in raising mental health awareness in our community. Funded by the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health and the Champion Counseling Center of Faithful Central Bible Church.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Our guest is Miles Taylor. His new book is called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. Miles Taylor, I ask you, what if the next Trump is the same old Trump? I do this show every day for 3 hours, and I've had more people than I can count as guests, of course, over the last couple of years. And to a person, I've not asked a single individual. With all that we continue to see coming out, we're up to indictment number 3, on the eve of indictment number 3, with more to come. And yet no one who I've talked to on this program, and I've talked to everybody, no one has said that they have seen anything as yet that stops him from becoming or being the presumptive Republican nominee in 2024. With that said, I ask you, what if the next Trump is the same old Trump?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think if Donald Trump wins re-election, it's going to be the same old Trump. I think it's going to be vastly worse than what we saw before. And the picture I try to paint in this book, Blowback, is the thing that I've kind of been waiting for someone to write, and I didn't expect I was going to have to go write it, is we've seen way too many books come out of the Trump administration, and no one wants to read another Trump retrospective. There's enough of those on the shelves. We don't need that. And so I've been waiting for someone to just try to paint a picture. What did he want to do in the first term that he was stopped from doing, that he would do in a second term? And the picture was really scary. And I'm just going to run through just a fast list for you, Tavis, of things that worried me. I thought I knew it all. I thought I knew how bad it would be if he returned. And then I talked to all of these people that served in different departments and agencies under him. And the shortest way to sum it up is we all remember from history how scary the Third Reich was. That was when the Nazi Party took over Germany, which had been a very prosperous democracy and a very healthy democratic republic until the Third Reich. Well, a second term of Trump would equal the Third Reich. And that's the type of thing that would have gotten me canceled for saying it 7 years ago. But now it's just a sober-minded, fact-driven forecast based on what his loyalists tell me, because they talk to me about how in a second term they'll want to use the powers of the intelligence community to spy on rivals, that they'll want to use the Justice Department to prosecute political opponents. They have plans to administer loyalty tests to federal employees to make sure their loyalty to the president. They want to gerrymander the federal courts in their favor to submit legislation to get rid of or move courts like the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals here in California that often ruled against Trump. They want to deploy federal security forces in U.S. cities like they did in Portland with DHS. They want to withhold federal emergency aid, disaster aid from states and localities around the country if they don't support the president, and on, including regulating the media. I don't know how you can see any other parallel than a parallel to dictatorship when you hear those policy ideas for the next administration. And I hate to say it because to me it sounds really hyperbolic. It sounds over the top, but that's now the environment that we're in, and it's in Donald Trump's own words. I mean, we hear him on the campaign trail talking about an autocrat saying, I am your revenge, I am your retribution.
It is scary, to be sure. Our remaining moments with Miles Taylor when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
KBLA Talk 1580 is an intervention. When we come forward, includes you. KBLA Talk 1580, turning pain into power.
JP Morgan Chase is building on the investments in California and around the country to help close the racial wealth gap and build a more equitable future. As part of JP Morgan Chase commitment, they are taking action to help improve financial wealth and access to banking in the Black community, helping more people open low-cost checking and savings accounts, hosting community seminars with supporting Black-led institutions by building awareness about financial investments, hiring community managers, and opening community center branches like Crenshaw, Inglewood, and downtown LA. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Get the tools to help reach your financial goals. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Sprinklers in the Rain and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on.
K-Drip. Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Just a few minutes left here in conversation with Miles Taylor. His new book is called Blowback, a warning to save democracy from the next Trump. If you're in Southern California, you can meet him, see him, hear him, get a book signed by him tomorrow night, Tuesday, July 25th, 6:30 p.m. At Diesel Bookstore in Santa Monica. Before I lose him in the next few minutes here at the top of the hour and wrap this conversation, let me come to this. I was thinking, you ran that list, and it was scary to hear, and yet the question I'm left with is, what are we to do if that's what his agenda is? And if, in fact, he is, as we all believe at the moment, the presumptive Republican nominee, never mind being on the eve of indictment number 3, as I said earlier, and more coming, what are we to do, Miles Taylor? What do you hope comes through from reading this text?
Well, let me give you short, medium, and long term. So in the short term, I think there still is a window to protect our democracy, and there are states across the country that still need to and should pass laws to prevent a power-hungry chief executive in the White House from abusing his authority. And there's a lot of legislation around the country to try to better safeguard our democracy. Same thing in Congress, although I don't have a lot of optimism with the Republican House that legislation is going to get through. But there's still some time to pass some of these democracy reforms. That's the short term. In the medium term, I think that really the answer is that we have got to bolster these alternatives to Donald Trump. And that means Republicans of conscience coming forward, abandoning the guy in the primary process, and getting someone else in that competition. I'd much rather Joe Biden go up against a sane Republican, and there's not too many of them in the field, but the data does show there are quite a few Republicans who want to move on from Trump. They just need to start speaking up. But my answer for the long term, Tavis, is in addition to bigger reforms to our democracy to make it harder for extremists to win like Donald Trump, what we all need to do is really start making it easier to dissent. And I've said this, but I got to say it again, is right now the cost of speaking up in this country is way too high. And I think the majority of us would consider ourselves pretty moderate people who want rational politicians. But the cost of speaking up is so high that folks often don't speak out when they hear someone from the MAGA movement about something anti-democratic. And the only way to lower that price of dissent is to increase the supply. And that comes to all of us.
I've got 90 seconds left, Miles Taylor. I'll give it to you. What do you make of the silence and ultimately the complicity of those running against Donald Trump? You're right. There are a bunch of them running, but even they aren't saying anything. How do you read that?
Well, they hold their tongues to their everlasting shame. And Liz Cheney said something similar to that effect a few months ago. She said what I've been saying for several years, which is that her colleagues will say one thing in private and something else in public. And that defect, that unwillingness to tell the truth, is literally putting our country in this 250-year experiment with democracy in danger. And, we have seen a few start to throw punches against Donald Trump, Chris Christie and Will Hurd and Asa Hutchinson. It's unclear if they're going to move ahead in the polls. But when I see people like Mike Pence defend the man who almost got him and his family killed on January 6th, all I can say is it's a case study in cowardice. And we have got to push back against it. But I will say that note of optimism is the fact that you are seeing some Republicans start to break away from MAGA does give me a little bit of hope. But this is still a 5-alarm fire for our democracy, and we need all hands on deck. So I hope folks get the chance to come see me or to pick up Blowback and understand what a second term of Donald Trump would look like if we make that mistake, so that we can tell others and we can stop it.
Miles Taylor is a truth teller. He did it in 2018 anonymously in the New York Times. And now unmasked. He's telling the truth once again that we need to wrestle with. His book is called Blowback, A Warning to Save Democracy from the Next Trump. Congrats on the text, Miles Taylor. Have a great book signing tomorrow night at Diesel Bookstore in Santa Monica, 6:30. Good to have you on the program. And you hear Miles playing your music, right? You hear it, Miles Taylor?
Oh, yeah, I did.
All
Tavis,
right.
You're a great man and a patriot, and I love your tune.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on. That's our program for today. Thanks for tuning in. Back here tomorrow, Lord willing, to do it all over again. Until then, thanks for tuning in to Tavis Smiley.